There's a story of a man named Private Ashworth who lays on the battlefield after the first day of the Battle of the Somme. He lays there for 3 whole days without a jaw, unable to scream for help. It's a terrible story. And what Gillies is able to give him back is his identity.
Harold Gillies is known as the grandfather of plastic surgery. Lindsey's book is called The Facemaker, One Surgeon's Battle to Mend the Disfigured Soldiers of World War I. And we can speak to her now. Good morning, Lindsey.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
It's a great pleasure. I mean, the First World War is one of those things that we probably can't fully imagine the level of devastation on people who were injured and survived. But try and give us a sense of the scale of the problem that would have been facing people like Harold Gillies.
Absolutely. I mean, this was a time when losing a limb made you a hero, but losing a face made you a monster to a society that was largely intolerant of facial differences. The nature of the First World War brought across many facial injuries. Men were maimed, they were burned, some were gassed, some were even kicked in the face by horses. And as you said, before the war was over, 280,000 men from France, Britain, and Germany alone would suffer some form of facial trauma. So there was a great need for facial reconstruction and plastic surgery at this time, greater than in any previous time in history at this point.
But the notion of plastic surgery didn't really exist, so Harold Gillies kind of had to make it up as he was going along.
Well, plastic surgery did predate the First World War in a smaller sense. In fact, the term plastic surgery was coined in 1798. At the time, plastic meant something that you could shape or you could mold. So in this case, a patient's skin or soft tissue. But attempts at altering a person's appearance in earlier periods tended to really focus on small areas of the face, such as the ears or the nose. You don't really get attempts at the wholesale restructuring of a face until the American Civil War in the mid-19th century. And even then, it was on a much smaller scale that we're seeing in the First World War.
So what did he do? How did he advance the science on this?
Well, I mean, he establishes principles of plastic surgery. And again, because there are so many men requiring this kind of surgery, he's able to experiment. He's able to try new methods, to test these methods, and they become standardized into practice. So plastic surgery really enters a modern era at this time. You might call Harold Gillies the father or the grandfather of modern plastic surgery, but not plastic surgery itself.
And presumably he got some things wrong. I mean, you talked about this sheer numbers of people, the sheer level of the violence, and the fact he was experimenting. There must have been some failures as well as successes.
Absolutely. He didn't have any textbooks to guide him, and failure always informs science, and certainly was a big part of Harold Gillies' story. In fact, there was a pilot named Lumley who was terribly burned during the First World War. It took him a year to get into Harold Gillies' care, at which point he was terribly scarred. He was addicted to morphine. He was in a really bad state, and he begged Gillies to do the operation sooner rather than later because he just wanted a resolution. But Gillies was really hesitant to do that, but he did give in to Lumley eventually, and Lumley underwent the operation and ended up dying. This is personally a tragic story, but in the history of plastic surgery, it's important because it teaches Harold Gillies that you should never do today what you can reasonably put off doing tomorrow. And it becomes a tenet of plastic surgery. And he also learns that when you're rebuilding the face, you have to do it in piecemeal. You can't do it all at once or the system will become overwhelmed.
So is he an ethical man, do you think? He was a sort of heroic figure that's in all of this?
I think so. We have to also remember that Harold Gillies is the product of facial biases of the time. Arguably, he wouldn't have been needed if people could have accepted these disfigured soldiers. And I also want to note that I don't use that term lightly, disfigured. I actually worked with a disability activist. Today, we might say something like facial difference, but these men were disfigured to the society they lived in. They were forced to sit on blue benches so that the public knew not to look at them. Sorry.
So, and also they are. I mean, I think one wants to be welcoming to people with disabilities, but equally, if you've been damaged in a war, you are disfigured. This is not a choice that you made. It's not a product of birth. It's not a product of genetics. A bomb has exploded in your face. It must be acceptable to say these people have been harmed, and he's trying to fix harm.
Absolutely. And it was a real struggle for these men. It could be very isolating. There's a story of a man named Private Ashworth who lays on the battlefield after the first day of the Battle of the Somme. He lays there for 3 whole days without a jaw, unable to scream for help. It's a terrible story. And what Gillies is able to give him back is his identity. He didn't just mend these men's broken faces, but also their spirits.
And what now? I mean, how much is because there's a kind of cosmetic surgery which has a terrible reputation, and there's plastic surgery to help people who've suffered accidents or they've suffered differences in their birth. How much do we owe to him now? What were the practices that exist?
Well, if you think of plastic surgery as one heading, and underneath you have reconstructive surgery and you also have cosmetic surgery. So they're both important parts of plastic surgery. And there are a lot of plastic surgeons who do both reconstructive and cosmetic. After the war, Harold Gillies does move into the cosmetic realm because he's trying to establish plastic surgery as a subspecialty of medicine. And he says that, reconstructive surgery is about returning something to, quote, normal, but cosmetic surgery is about surpassing the normal. And he was excited by both challenges.
And do we think that cosmetic surgery is a net plus or a net negative to human life? The easy answer to me would seem to be it's a net negative. It's sort of preyed on people's insecurities. It's made surgeons very rich, but it's impoverished people who try to get it. Is that unfair, do you think?
I think there's a bigger debate to be had. But if we were just talking from Gillies' perspective, he said that, he grappled with this kind of decision to go into cosmetic surgery and to profit from it. But he felt that if people were uncomfortable or upset with something, even something minor, that who was he to say that they shouldn't fix it or alter their appearance. So he really believed that people should have control of their identities, whether that was through the reconstructive process, through damage, caused by war, or it was through cosmetic processes as well.
Do you buy that when it comes to cosmetic surgery as an argument?
I think that, people have a right to alter their bodies as they wish, but I do have concern about the fact that, social media platforms are able to target younger and younger children, essentially. So a lot of people are exposed to, the wonders of cosmetic surgery at a younger age. And I think that can have an effect on their self-confidence.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for joining us, Lindsey. Really interesting.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
That is Lindsey Fitzharris, and her book is called The Facemaker, One Surgeon's Battle to Mend the Disfigured Soldiers of World War I. That was Harold Gillies, who is the grandfather of plastic surgery there.